Hey everyone, it is October 31, 2013. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to tell you everything you need to know about buying a new iPad Air or Retina iPad Mini. This is the iMore Show. Joining me as always, our managing editor, Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
Fine, sir, thank you.
And from all the way across the pond, or as he would call it, the original world, Richard Devine. How are you, Richard?
I'm very well. The old world is very good.
The old world. Now, this is not a Halloween episode. We are not in costume. This is just the way we look. I've been warned that Google Hangouts are now automagicaler, and they might be doing their best to make us better looking. I think that's failing, so we're just going to muddle on through with our normal costumes intact. iPad Air launches today if you're in Australia because you're living in the future, but for everyone else it launches tomorrow morning. As usual, we have got our traditional iPad buyer's guide, this year bifurcated between the iPad Air and the Retina iPad Mini. And the first question everyone is going to ask is, do I need one of these things? If you don't have an iPad, it's a different question, but specifically for our audience, if you do have an iPad already, maybe you've got the iPad original still, you know, rocking that like it's 2010. Maybe you've got an iPad 2 because those sold in the tens of millions, or maybe you've got one of the models released last year, the iPad 3, iPad 4, or iPad Mini. I'm going to go just around the room a little bit and get your guys' feelings. So, Peter, what do you have now, and do you think it's worthwhile upgrading to one of the new ones?
I have an iPad 3, and I think it's worth upgrading to the Mini for sure. I'm actually not really that interested in the iPad Air personally, although I understand why a lot of people are really enthusiastic about it. But this is the year that the iPad Mini has removed enough of its limitations that I think it would be a really solid upgrade from what I have.
Richard, how about you?
So at the minute, I'm using the iPad 4 primarily. I've mentioned it in the past because of the display. I just wasn't feeling the iPad Mini display when it first came out. So it's actually really tough for me this year because, on the one hand, the Mini, like Peter says, the Mini is now it's a serious upgrade option. You've got the fantastic display. You've got the same internals as as the bigger one, so it does make it a little bit more difficult. That said, I do quite like the big screen on the big iPad, and they've done with the iPad Air exactly what we all hoped they would do. They've trimmed it down, they've slimmed it down, and made it a little bit less bulky. So it's a tough one from where I am.
So here are my quick recommendations, and you guys please disagree with me if I get anything wrong. If you have an original iPad, just upgrade. That machine didn't get iOS 6, it didn't get iOS 7. You need a new iPad. You do. I'm talking to you right in the back there. If you have an iPad 2, 3, or 4, and you're thinking about an iPad Air, here's the deal. You'll get a Retina display if you have the iPad 2, and it's so much better a machine. I mean, Anantek's benchmarks, and I think John Gruber's benchmarks say, and Peter, this blew my mind, the iPad Air is now as fast as the 2010, like raw numbers, as the 2010 MacBook Air.
That's astonishing.
It's kind of silly. So if you want a Retina display, that's the way to go. The iPad 3, it had an A5X chip, which was okay, but it redlined in graphics, and a lot of game developers will tell you that they had to do a lot of downscaling. They had to really work hard to make their games work on an iPad 3. So again, Peter, I think if you're a gamer and you have an iPad 3, it's a worthwhile update if you found the gaming experience not to your satisfaction.
Fair enough.
And the last thing is, if you have an iPad 4, the only reason I would tell you to suggest is if you do a ton of, to upgrade, is if you do a ton of reading or watching videos and it's just too heavy for you to hold up. Or if you happen to live in one of the areas where the new LTE bands gives you LTE where previously you had none because, you know, it's like going from dial-up to broadband. Or if you really, really want to take a lot of low-light selfies and do a lot of midnight FaceTime calls, the new camera's got better low-light sensitivity. And we are not here to judge you. We are just here to give you the facts. So I'm not making a huge case to upgrade here. I think the iPad 3 and 4 are fantastic machines, so it's just those. And Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's just those things that would make you want to upgrade.
Yeah, I mean the iPad 4 in particular is a really capable piece of equipment, and the form factor is the big thing that's making me even consider upgrading from the 4 to the Air, because like you said, it is quite chunky, it's quite heavy, and I don't I've recently done quite a lot of traveling, and I've taken my iPad with me, but I really wish it was a lot less kind of cumbersome. So the form factor is a big thing. If the iPad 4 or the iPad 3 is just too thick and too heavy for you, then go for it.
And the last thing, sort of with the Mini, if you have a previous gen Mini or a previous gen iPad in general, the Mini with the Retina, like Peter said, that's an amazing machine. I'm still baffled that they've managed to get that done. It's not coming today like the iPad Air is. It'll come later in this month, but that's still a huge achievement. And if you're the kind of person who notices fine detail, if the small fonts on the last generation iPad Mini just weren't high resolution enough for you, it's a good upgrade. By all means, it's a good upgrade. If you've been waiting for this because you want the smaller form factor, also a good upgrade. So I guess what I'm saying, Peter, is that if you have specific pain points, these can address them. But the previous generation iPads were still pretty good.
Absolutely. I mean, outside of the first generation iPad, which is clearly past its prime at this point, and has been actually for quite a while, it's all really going to depend on the individual use for each person. Some people are going to see a big benefit if what they're doing is very processor intensive, is very graphics intensive. Some people aren't going to really see a big benefit. The iPad Air is the first significant redesign that we've seen to the iPad chassis since the iPad 2 came out. That also means that creators of accessories for these devices, like cases and so on, are working late into the night to redesign stuff for them, and we've already gotten quite a few press releases from companies that say that they've got them ready. It wasn't a huge amount of work to rework their existing designs to accommodate the Air, but it still means that you're going to have to buy new accessories. So you should also factor that into your buying decision if you're considering the Air.
And the last sort of thing, I think those are all like awesome points. And the last thing I'll say is, if you are geeky, if you are nerdy, you probably already know that you're going to get them. But if you want to future-proof yourself, these are 64-bit machines. These are supremely powerful machines. These have the latest and the greatest of everything: best displays, best chipsets, best everything. So if you want something that's going to run, I mean, we were talking about this on Vector with Brian Klug. These chipsets are desktop quality. They have no business being in mobile devices. So if you want something that will run with iOS 7 and all the apps ridiculously well now and likely for 2 or 3 years to come, future-proofing alone can be an attractive feature for you. Moving on to people new to the platform, I think these are a great jumping-off point because you've now essentially got one iPad. It just happens to come in 2 sizes. They are, I mean, in software they call them binary identical. I don't know if I can call them atomically identical, but they are just the same iPad. One happens to have a 7.9-inch screen. One happens to have a 9.7-inch screen. We've got a bunch of articles up. I did one about, trying to choose between an iPad, a Galaxy Tab or Note, a Nexus tablet, a Kindle Fire HD or HDX, or a Microsoft Surface. And I got in a lot of trouble for that article, but I'm going to state it again. Unless you have an incredibly specific need that Apple is not filling, I think the iPad is still so far ahead of what everybody else is doing that it should be your default choice. And Richard, you've used everything that there is to use. The tablet market for me still hasn't shaken out the way the phone market has.
No, I mean, like you say, I've used pretty much all of them. I've got a Nexus 7 lying around somewhere, and I've had Kindle Fires and all those sort of things. And my advice is kind of the same. Unless you're really deeply entrenched in Google's content ecosystem or Amazon's content ecosystem, or you need something like a Surface because it comes with free Office. My sister just got one because she wanted the free Office to take to university with her. So, but that's a really specific need that the iPad didn't meet. For everybody else, I really couldn't recommend anything as highly as either the iPad Mini or the iPad Air now.
And that was one of the things that was interesting to me about the Surface discussion. We've been talking about that a lot. And Peter, that sort of kind of rolls me into the iPad Air versus MacBook Air discussion. Because for a lot of people, a tablet is a better computer. For my mother, for example, I've said this often, her iMac can do way more than her iPad, but she can't do as much with an iMac as she can with an iPad. An iPad for her is a better computer. Do you have any advice for people trying to decide between, maybe an iPad or a Surface in between, or a MacBook Air or laptop on the other end?
I think it really comes down to what you want to do. I get asked this question all the time when I work in the store that I work at on the weekends. People come in and they think about buying an iPad to replace a computer, and I think that there's a dangerous fallacy that people believe that they're going to be able to do everything on their iPad that they could do with their computer. You can't, and certain things when you're doing it on an iPad are going to be a lot tougher to do than they will with a computer, like copying and pasting information between different screens, for example. That's a lot more arduous because it actually involves you, selecting the range of text or whatever that you want to copy and then moving it into another window. It just gets to be a little bit cumbersome. So I think that if you fall into that kind of usage characteristic, you're probably still better off with a laptop than you are with a tablet. But if your use is more straightforward content consumption, and I hate to say that because the iPad is a great content creation machine as well, but if you're more interested in just reading emails, responding to them, reading news, checking sites online, maybe doing online shopping, playing games, using apps that may interest you that are specific need, the iPad is a fantastic machine and certainly has replaced or dramatically supplanted people's computer use for a very large number of consumers who've gone out and bought these things. So again, you really have to sort of determine for yourself, based on your usage, what the best solution for you is.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. And I'll kind of frame my advice this way. If you want to do traditional computing tasks, a traditional computer will just always be better than that. In the same way, giant iron is still better in a lot of things than tiny little MacBook Airs. You need to figure out what you're going to do and then pick the right tool for it. Ben Thompson was on Vector this week, and he had this excellent point where, you have to use the device that suits your needs. Now, if you're primarily going to be doing tons of typing, if you're going to run Mathematica, Photoshop, Final Cut Pro, you do not want an iPad. You want a full-on Mac or a Windows machine. If you are going to be doing a lot of things that are post-PC, which, an iPad should not replace a laptop. It should succeed it. It should be able to do exactly what Steve Jobs said, things better than what a laptop or a phone can do. And if those are the kind of tasks you're doing, and his example was making music in GarageBand, which he feels is a way better experience than GarageBand on the PC, on the Mac, then that can be of interest to you. And John Gruber had a good point on this too, and it's exactly how I use it. If you're going to take a laptop and an iPad, is a very different proposition than if you just want to have one device or the other. So we have a ton of information about this up. I urge you to look at it. Full articles on all of this stuff. And it kind of brings us neatly to the next question, which has become really complicated. Let's say you've decided for sure you're going to get a new iPad, and you're going to get an iPad and not anything else. You still have all these models now. We have the iPad 2 from 2011 still lingering around like that drunken uncle after the Christmas party who just won't go home. You have last year's iPad mini. You have the new iPad Air and the new Retina iPad Air. And it's a bit of a confusing mix because you have two 9.7-inch screens, one standard, one Retina, two 7.9-inch screens, one standard, one Retina. So you have two screen sizes, two screen densities to choose from, four different price points. Peter, you work in retail. How do you even begin to describe this to a customer?
Well, I think that it really isn't that big a deal. We kind of do the same thing with the MacBook Air versus the MacBook Pro, and up until very recently had to do it with the Pro itself because the Pro's product matrix was a little bit more complicated too. I think that ultimately you have to consider that the Retina display systems are designed for a more discriminating consumer. Somebody who is looking for maximum color fidelity, is looking for a really easy on the eye text reading experience, those sort of things. Whereas the low-res ones are more aimed at people who value price over functionality. Beyond that, though, I mean, you've got to look under the hood and realize that the Retina display-equipped systems are much more robust systems all around than the ones equipped with standard resolution displays.
Richard, are you leaning one way or the other? Like, if you were a new customer today, or if someone in your family were asking you?
I'm just sort of trying to do the maths in my head in my own real money as to what the price differences is. I mean, I would never recommend the iPad 2 at this point at all. It's even for the price that it is, it's just not. It's not worth the outlay because it's still quite an expensive. It's still quite a lot of money to spend on something like that. So just scrap that one straight away. And if you want the big iPad, go for the iPad Air. For me, it's kind of clear cut because it's about 100 and so many pounds more, but you're going to get so much extra life out of it. In 6 to 12 months with an iPad 2, you're going to be throwing it at the wall, screaming, wishing you'd got the more expensive one anyway. So if it comes down to money and you really want the bigger iPad and you can't afford one yet, just kind of save up a little bit longer. Leave it, wait, and get the iPad Air. Don't get the big one. The Mini, I think it's about a £70 difference for the Retina Air over the Retina Mini. And again, I would say the same thing. If you can go to the extra for the Retina, I wouldn't even think twice about it. It's the Mini over here has not had a massive price drop, the original one. So it's still near enough the same sort of price that it was before. I think it's like £20 cheaper than it was pre-event. So it's not got much cheaper to make it any more attractive over the Mini for me.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree with that completely. I think the iPad 2 is only still around for either people for whom the dollar value is absolutely the most important feature, and in that case, I also would direct them towards a Mini instead because it's better technology for the same price. But there's a couple things. The iPad 2 and the iPad Mini are both storage constrained at 16 gigabytes, and as we find out every time Apple puts out a major iOS version update, you run out of space really quickly, and then you're really frustrated and there's not very much you can do. 16 gigabytes probably shouldn't be around anymore for iPads. They're probably also mostly geared towards education and enterprise who buy them in boxes of 20 and have huge investments in old 30-pin dock connector technology. So I would get those out of your consumer radar immediately. Then for the Air versus the Mini, it's actually interesting to me because there seems to be two groups of people. One is that, I love the iPad Mini and the Air is no longer that much bigger, so I might as well get the Air. And the other is I love the iPad and the Mini is not that much smaller now, so I might as well just get the Mini. And it depends entirely on how you're sort of wired together. And here's what I'm going to do. And I recognize, I'm a blogger and I get to get away with this kind of stuff where not everyone can, but I'm getting both. And I use the Mini and the Air differently. I use the Mini as a travel machine and a hotspot because it can go for 24 hours just working as a Wi-Fi hotspot. It's the best Wi-Fi hotspot I've ever had, and I use that to tether my laptop because I take my laptop everywhere. So it's like a companion machine for there. And then the Air I keep at home, and it's either at the sofa or next to my bed, and I use it to read comic books, to watch videos, to read, to do the web. And I really like the bigger screen for that. And then it's my primary machine because I really prefer doing that kind of stuff on an iPad, not on a computer. I'll even close my computer, open up my iPad, and use iCloud links, iCloud tabs to keep reading stuff because it's just much better at it. So depending on which of those two things, whether you travel more and size is a primary factor, or whether it's more of a computer to you and you want the real estate, that's how I decide. Peter, are you feeling one way or another yet?
Yeah, I mean, the iPad Mini has interested me for a long time, and up until now, I've been kind of a size queen. I've liked the 9.7-inch screen. It's a good form factor, especially for doing things like reading books. And if you're into graphic novels or comics, it's a really spectacular machine to do. And it's also really good for reading magazines and so on. But I can't deny that the iPad Mini is a fantastic machine. A great form factor, and it's a perfect machine to play games on. It really is a nice size for a lot of games. And what interested me about going to WWDC this year was seeing just how many iOS game developers demonstrate their stuff on minis and use minis primarily. It's very clear to me that, at least when it comes to game development, this is the sort of form factor that a lot of the game makers are shooting for. So the idea of having an iPad mini with a higher resolution screen and the A7 processor inside of it really makes it, for me, an appealing platform. And that's really one of the big factors that's driving me to want the iPad mini over the iPad Air. But there are some other reasons as well. You know, the fact is that for me anyway, a 9.7-inch screen is just too bulky to be a really good portable machine. It's a good supplemental machine if I'm working on, let's say, an airplane, for example. I don't have, because I'm, you know, kind of big around the middle, I don't really have a lot of space in coach to stretch out with my laptop, especially because I'm using now a 15-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display. Just is not enough space in that seat for me to accommodate that size. But you know what? An iPad is the right size for that, and the screen is big enough that I can actually sit there with a text editing or word processing application like Pages or some of the other stuff that I've experimented with and actually get some real work done. That's a very important consideration. So I think that there are pros and cons of both sides, but I'm really edging now more towards the Mini because of all the advances that Apple's packed into that tiny little machine this year.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And if you're really, really not sure, I'd advise you to just, go to an Apple store, try them both out. They don't have the Retina Mini yet, but it's going to be very similar to the current Mini. And you can pick them up in your hands and you can hold them, and you can see what feels right to you, whether one feels too small or the one just feels too big, what the interface looks like, what text looks like, what the apps look like, and then at least you can make a personally informed decision because they are so close. I don't think there's a wrong answer this year. I think it's just the difference is very subtle, and it's going to be one of those things, almost like finding the right perfect shoe size, where you just got to feel what's comfortable. An easier decision, primarily because Apple did not go with the only acceptable color for the iPad this year. There's no gold option. Reportedly, they tried it, and it was just too much of a gold thing. So they have stuck with the traditional silver and white, which they introduced with the iPad Mini last year, and they've gone with space gray and black, which they introduced with the iPhone 5S this year. Both of them look good. Some people have really strong feelings about this. And Richard, I know it's almost like a running joke, the white phones, or some bloggers just swear by the white phones, but some people find white on a faceplate hugely distracting. Some people find it gets discolored. Some people feel like black shows damage too much, or that it's not flashy enough. It ends up being a really personal choice, I think.
Definitely. I mean, I kind of I like the white faceplates on the phones, but when it comes to an iPad, for me it's the black versions all the way. Primarily because I use it a lot for watching Netflix, online video, and the large white faceplate to me when I'm watching video is just too distracting. Even in a dark room, you can still see the outside of the iPad. So at least for that sort of thing, if you're going to be consuming a lot of content and the white does distract a little bit. Even with a lot of game playing, it just catches your eye a little bit out of the corner. And now they've gone for space gray as well on the back. I had to get a space gray iPhone because it's all they had available, but the color's superb, and it's a really good combination, really good winner for me.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't watch a video but you use more webs and stuff, iOS 7 is incredibly white, so it kind of disappears on a white device, which is really odd. But I have a daft reason for what I do. I just buy the opposite color every generation because Apple tends to have the same design for 2 generations. So, for example, I have a white iPad mini, so I'll be getting a black and space gray Retina iPad mini because that way I can easily visually tell them apart, and I don't pick up the wrong one. And I know that's silly, but I actually like both colors, and this gives me an excuse to enjoy them. Peter, I know black is traditionally the most popular color in almost all the things. It's a little black dress. Do you have a preference either way?
Typically I stick with black, and it's for some of the same reasons that Richard pointed out. I think that the bezel on black iPhones, on black iPads, and so on disappears into the background faster than a white bezel does. I noticed the same effect when I'm looking at a computer monitor. I've got some computer monitors that have black bezels, and I've got some computer monitors that have white bezels. And the white bezeled ones are definitely a little more distracting to me. So, as a personal preference, I like black. Black is best. Best.
And I don't think we have to worry about wear and tear anymore. Apple spent a lot of time back in the iPhone 4 days. I mean, I think they spent like 9 or 10 months getting white right, so it doesn't discolor. I've had a white iPhone since 2010, 2011 now. It looks the same as it does the day I bought it. Also, space gray looks to be a much better solution for dark color than the slate gray was, which did chip and show scratches more. This looks like it's much more resistant. So I think you don't have to worry which one you buy. And my typical advice is close your eyes, picture an iPad in your hand. Whatever color you picture, that's probably the one you're going to want to get. It is not so easy for storage capacity. Apple has decided to make the different price points of the iPad entirely dependent, for the most part. There is cellular options, but for the most part on the storage capacity. So you get 16, 32, 64, and 128 gigabyte versions. And you can quibble about whether it's worth, whether that much difference in storage is worth that much price, but it's something that Apple can use for categories, and it's something that people understand. So, that's the world we live in. I'm going to go on record as saying I don't think anyone should buy a 16 gigabyte iPad anymore, unless you're using it as a thin client, VNC into another machine. If you plan on doing nothing local on it, you're always surfing the web, then you can get away with it. But if you start adding any amount of games, media, video, anything starts taking up space, 16 gigabytes goes really fast. On the flip side of that, I don't recommend 164 gigabytes, so 128, I'm getting my numbers wrong, 128 gigabytes for anyone except the Peter Cohen types who want to keep, entire music libraries available to them locally at the touch of their finger. And Peter, I would humbly suggest if you need that much space, you probably knew the size you were getting before I opened my mouth.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, okay, look, I admit that I'm kind of an edge case. I've got a very big iTunes library, and I don't really like to rely on the cloud that much, although I have to admit that iTunes Radio is kind of changing my tune on that. It's making streaming audio over my iOS devices when I'm out and about much more reasonable to use than I ever thought it would be. Having said that, look, I think 16 gigs is just not enough space for anybody except the most modest user. Maybe somebody who's brand new to the platform, who doesn't expect to be downloading many applications, maybe that would be okay. For just about everybody else, if you've got a little bit of iOS experience, if you've got apps from other devices that you're planning on transferring over, or if you think that you're going to use your iPad for most stuff that people use iPads for, 32 is a much better, more robust option. 32 is sort of the sweet spot, I think, that a lot of people can't afford and should get to get the maximum life out of their product without having to worry about clearing space off every couple of weeks or months to install new apps or updates to the operating system.
Richard, what are you going for?
Probably the same as the iPhone, 32 minimum. Like you guys, 16 is just not enough. I had a 16 gigabyte iPhone 5, and when iOS 7 dropped, I had to clear half of that out, just half of the apps off, just to be able to install it. So immediately that just wipes out. I wouldn't go much bigger than that personally, because I do a lot of streaming, so I get a lot of video from Netflix. A lot of my music is now streamed either directly from the cloud or my iTunes library, or things like Spotify. So I'm never storing a lot of music and media content on there a lot. But it's nice to know that when I do travel, so recent trips to across various parts of the world where data is not something, it's not something I can rely on. It's nice to have enough free space that I can offline a few albums, a few movies to watch on the plane, and that sort of thing. And obviously, games are getting bigger as well. If you play a lot of games, I'm still playing things like Real Racing 3, and they're over a gigabyte in size. So just one of those, you're already eating up the space just by installing just one large game. Some of the games we've got now, like Infinity Blade 3, and obviously Real Racing, and some of the stuff that 2K is bringing out, get as much as you can afford, because you will regret it otherwise at some point.
Yeah, no, I cannot stress that enough, and I keep going back to my mom. She had a 16 gigabyte iPad 2 because she really didn't think she'd ever use more than that. And then her godchildren were there one day, and she downloaded Tupi and Bino for them. She bought a season off iTunes, and that downloaded locally. And then she bought the Disney app that ended up being 2 point something gigabytes. And then iOS 7 came out, and she did not have enough space to download it, so she had to go through and delete a bunch of stuff. And Georgia had this experience. I think it was the iPhone 4S, where she got the 16 gigabyte model, started taking 1080p video, and people do take photographs and videos with their iPads, and that ate up all her storage. And she really needed to take some video and had to delete things that she hadn't backed up because that's the choice you have to make. So it is $100, which is a lot of money to some people, but over the course of the year, especially when it's really important things to you, like your memories or stuff that you need access to on a trip, you will appreciate investing that money. I think, the 128 edge case, but between 32 and 64, you'll be happy.
Agreed.
Definitely.
All right, so now, should you get the Wi-Fi version or the cellular version, and if so, what carrier should you get? And we're all in different regions, so it'll be interesting. I always get cellular as an option. It is a bit expensive, $130 just for the cellular chipset, which is, padding Apple's coffers. But I use my iPad mini as a hotspot, which means anytime I'm out and I'm connected to the internet, I'm doing it through my iPad mini. And that's invaluable to me because, again, 24 hours of battery life, it's crazy. I get the big iPad with the same thing because if I ever want to, if I'm just going to travel on a day trip or overnight trip and I don't need a computer, I still want ubiquitous connection to the internet. It's very hard to give up once you get started with it. And LTE is so fast that once you have an iPad, you pull it out and you have no data connection, you feel like you've lost electricity. It's completely a first nerd problem. But there is no going back. So I always buy the 3G version. It also has GPS, which is an advantage. Apple has not seen fit to put non-assisted GPS in the Wi-Fi version. So if GPS is important to you, it's something to consider. Canada's actually interesting this year. We're starting to get carriers, not quite T-Mobile crazy, but fairly crazy. I believe TELUS is doing something where you can get the iPad on a contract, which means you basically get it for free, and the subsidy is built into your plan the way it is for a phone. We also have a bunch of the traditional carriers who are just giving you data. I think I pay $30 for 5 gigabytes, and it's just a little SIM card. I stick it in, and I go. Peter, I know you said that the U.S. is beyond confusing now, but T-Mobile has entered the fray, so I'm sure it's even more confusing than usual.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the big four, all of the big four, Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile now offer iPads, and T-Mobile is the latest entrant to this. And in their typical disruptive way, T-Mobile is really trying to shake up the iPad market too, because while AT&T and Verizon have dominated with their LTE networks. They're very robust LTE networks, and Verizon has by far of any of them the biggest LTE deployment right now. Sprint also makes iPads available and iPad data plans available for their network as well, although it's primarily 3G and 4G for those devices. The interesting thing is that T-Mobile is stepping into it now, and what they're doing is they're giving away 200 megabytes of free access for the life of the device, regardless of whether you even have an existing data plan with them. You can get the 200 megabytes free every month. Their plans, if I understand right, started around $20 a month for about 500 megabytes, which is not terrific, but this 200 megabyte thing really interests me. It's really, I think this is going to actually push me more in the direction of getting a 4G equipped iPad, and I haven't had a cell-equipped iPad since an iPad 2 that I got right after they came out, that I stopped using a long time ago because I just didn't want to pay AT&T any more money. So it makes for a very interesting market right now. But if you look at Sprint's got plans starting at $5 a month, for like 25 megs per month. If you're only a very occasional user of data when you are not connected to Wi-Fi, there are a lot of different options to choose from. Everything from the ridiculous like getting 50 gigs a month or whatever from Verizon, down to these 25 megabyte plans that are designed just for very occasional use, when you've got no other option, when you can't tether to a cell phone or connect to a local Wi-Fi network. So there are a broad range of options, and it really depends ultimately on partly, I guess, what carrier you're currently using. Because if you're using a carrier like AT&T or Verizon that allows you to share everything, and sort of divide up your data plan between however many devices you've got, it may make more sense to go with that and just use a shared pool. On the other hand, if you're paying for some discrete coverage from somebody, you may be able to get a much better value from Sprint or T-Mobile.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because the Amazon Kindle's original claim to fame was sort of that Wi-Fi, that internet access for life, and it's interesting to see that going over to the iPad. But my one question is, Peter, 200 megabytes is not a lot, so that's probably for someone who's only gonna, emergency internet use, maybe.
I would say so. Yeah, somebody who, maybe only once in a very long time needs to fire up their email and send an email from an iPad without being connected to Wi-Fi. It's not, even the 200 megabytes that T-Mobile gives for free is not a lot. I think it's the smack dealer approach: give them a taste for free, and then reel them in when they need more.
Some people have asked me why I don't just tether to my iPhone. Get a Wi-Fi iPad, save some money. My iPhone is the center of my universe. Like, I need that to always have battery charge and always be available. And tethering, even though it's not hugely battery draining, it is battery draining. And I would rather have my iPhone, a kingdom unto itself, and let my iPad worry about tethering and worry about itself. Richard, how are the UK plans shaping up?
Well, so far, I've been a little bit out of the loop in the last sort of 24 hours. So far, I've only seen actual pricing from one of the carriers. It's 3, and it also happens to be the one that I would always try and recommend. It's the carrier that I use the most, mainly because they offer more. They just offer bigger allowances. So you can buy a subsidised iPad Air from them tomorrow. They'll sell you one. Starts at £119 up front for a 16 gigabyte one. Increasing, I think the most you'll pay is something like £279 for a 64. I don't think they're selling 128. But the deals are pretty good. You can get 15 gigabytes of data for either £25 or £29 a month, depending on how much you pay up front for your iPad. Or if if you go and buy one outright, either from 3, they'll sell you a cellular iPad Air just off the shelf. You can get some pretty good 1-month rolling deals, so you're not signed into a contract. The subsidized ones, obviously, you're tied in for 2 years. So if you're planning on keeping it for 2 years, it's maybe a good way to save a good chunk of cash up front. But you can get a deal for 10 gigabytes for like £15 a month, just SIM only, 1 month rolling agreement. You're not happy with it, you just cancel it. 2 of the other big 4 carriers have said they will be offering the iPad Air, but at the minute it looks like they're probably just going to open the stores tomorrow, and it costs what it costs. The big thing for us this year is LTE, because previously we only had one LTE carrier when the iPad 4 came out. Now 3 of the big 4 carriers have enabled it. The 4th one, 3, is going to go live in December. So it comes down to ultimately price and maybe a bit of brand loyalty. You won't be able to buy one from O2. It doesn't look like at the moment, but they will do you a tablet, a SIM-only plan. We've been able to get tablet sort of dedicated plans since the very first iPad came out. So you'll be able to go to any of your carriers at some point in the next year or so. You'll be able to get LTE on all of them. But at this point, I would probably steer people towards 3 if they get good signal where they live and where they frequently are, just because you just get more for your money with them.
So again, I do recommend the cellular option, and I would say that it's nice to have it as an option. So if you have $130 extra in your pocket and you do want a little bit of safety, so that if you ever do travel or something goes wrong with your phone, I have walked around the airport in Toronto using an iPad Mini as my phone because my iPhone died, and it. There was no phone app, but I used Skype and I used everything over LTE, and it worked very, very well. So it is a safety net. but it's something absolutely worth considering. And we have, again, a ton of information in the buyer's guide on different carriers, different plans, different stuff that you can do. Peter, one of the other questions we get a lot is, where should I buy my iPad? Now, launch day is different than every day. Launch day, sometimes Walmart opens at midnight, which is before the Apple Store. But in general, there's a lot of things to consider. Apple's really good at the buying experience. They'll teach you how to use it. They'll offer free classes. But sometimes people have loyalty cards or have, gift certificates or something for a big box retailer. Or like you said, maybe there's a carrier that's offering a subsidy or a deal that you're already on. Do you have any advice for people when they're trying to figure out where to go to buy their iPad?
Just make sure that wherever you buy it, it's authorized by Apple to sell iPads. In other words, don't buy off the gray market. The reason I say that is because if you do buy off the gray market, you run the risk of not being able to get warranty service on your iPad later on. Now, having said that, even authorized dealers for these things are going to be offering a lot of incentives for people to buy. So, read your local circulars carefully and decide for yourself where you best want to spend your money. Also consider, buying locally. If there's an Apple reseller that's closer to you than the local Apple store, you might want to throw those guys a bone, because the prices are more or less going to be about the same. There may be a couple of deals someplace where one retailer is willing to sell the iPad at a loss in order to get you in the door, hoping to upsell you on some other stuff and may be willing to take $25 off of it or whatever. And there's also the issue to consider if you're buying it through your carrier, because the carriers are making financing deals with their customers to sell them for, in some cases, $0 up front, and then just paying them out over time if you want to take on some additional debt. One way or the other, if you're concerned or if you've had bad experiences with iPads breaking in the past, and every weekend that I work at that store, I see people coming in with busted screens, so I know it happens. You may want to consider AppleCare Plus, which is something that you can get from Apple within the first 30 days of buying the iPad or the iPad Mini. That will, they charge you a fee up front, and they also charge you an incident fee, but it will cover you for up to 2 major failures of the device. So if you break the screen, or if the buttons stop working or whatever, it will cover you and extends the warranty from 12 months to 24 months from the date of purchase. Sometimes that can be a real lifesaver for people who don't want to have to buy a brand new $500, $600, whatever dollar iPad to replace one that their kids might have broken accidentally.
Just going back to what you said previously about your local Apple resellers, I always recommend Apple stores, but for a lot of people, they're just not convenient. And to exactly your point, it is great to have a relationship with someone who is close by, because when you have a problem, when you have, if you need servicing, if something doesn't go right, and you walk into a store, it can be intimidating. You might not know what's happening. It could be a lot of chaos going on. But if you're used to going there, if that's your go-to place, and you have a relationship with the people there, you can get phenomenal service just because, we're all human beings, and human beings, their base nature, do want to help each other. If you have a local place to go to, absolutely go there.
There's one other thing that I want to point out too. A lot of times the local guys will try to make it worth your while to get your business. They may not be able to make a deal with you on the iPad. They may have to sell you the iPad at the same price that you would pay walking into an Apple store, but they may be willing to make a deal with you on the service plan or on accessories to go with it. So if you're planning on buying like a keyboard case or a folio case or something else, a screen cover, they may be willing to work with you a little bit on that and save you some money. So it can often make financial sense for you to go in there depending on what you've got your eye on.
That's an excellent point, and some carrier stores are the same way. Some carrier representatives get money based on accessories, some get it based on the plan, and they're not going to want to mess with their commission, but they might just give you big bags full of stuff that has absolutely no relevance to their commission. So always, ask the questions, find out, the best deal you can get. Richard, I always get AppleCare Plus because I am a klutz. I drop things. I had to have an iPad 4S replaced because it got hit by fireworks. I've told this story before. If there is something that can go wrong with an iPhone, for me, within the year, It often goes wrong, and it absolutely goes wrong the minute the warranty is expired. So I make it a point. It's not even a question for me anymore. I get AppleCare Plus. Have you weighed the pros and cons of it?
Um, it's not something traditionally which I've ever sort of stumped up for, but I do generally try and baby these things. But then, having said that, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, we've got an iPhone here that my wife's using. It's been dropped so many times that luckily it's all right. But you honestly never know, and especially with the iPad Air now, it's got so much thinner. I can't imagine that it's going to be as it's going to be as tough if you drop it on the concrete. So the thing I would say with that is the experience of having to get something repaired or replaced with Apple is without question one of the better experiences you're going to have in these sort of situations. So if you can afford it, it's definitely something worth doing, because if something does go wrong, you won't get the same you won't get the same sort of service as you would with a competitor tablet, where you'd maybe have to ring up a hotline on the other side of the world and stick it in a box and mail it off, and you can go and see somebody and they will deal with it in person with you. And we all know the Apple customer service is generally really, really good. Just on the reseller thing as well, one thing that it might be worth checking. I am fortunate enough that I've got an Apple reseller about 10 minutes walk away from me, so unlike the iPhone launch where you kind of have to go to an Apple store, it's a little bit more convenient. But I spoke to the guys earlier on just to make sure that they were selling them tomorrow, because their website still said coming soon, register now, that sort of thing. They're not sure how many they're going to have. So if if you're going to go that route and you're going to go maybe a high street retailer or a smaller authorized reseller, because the one near me is not a massive store, maybe worth giving them a quick call first just to see what they say. That they were pretty open with me and said we don't know how many we're going to have, but it's so if you want one, get here early. That still applies. It seems to be any Apple launch, get there as early as you can. But if you're not going to an Apple store, it might be worth giving them a call, because who knows how much stock is going to these other places.
Yeah, I've heard that Apple stores in North America, at least, and I believe internationally, are really well stocked. And I think 9to5Mac and Mac Rumors heard similar. So if it is your intent to line up tonight, you probably don't have to worry about not getting an iPad. Orders should go live like they typically do, 12 midnight local time, which in the U.S. is typically Cupertino Central of the Universe time, 3 a.m. Eastern time. You can order. It will take a while to deliver to you. You can go line up. I do not line up as early for iPads as I do for iPhones, because I'm not typically as sensitive to the model that I get, and also there tends to be more stock than people. But when there's no pre-orders, I do go a little bit earlier, because you never, ever know. So I'll drive by later. So once again, just sort of wrap things up, I'm going to get one of each. I'm going to get an iPad Air. I'm probably going to get the the Space Gray model, 32 gigabytes with cellular. I'll get a GSM model, just because all the Canadian carriers are GSM and you can use it pretty much everywhere. And then I'll be getting a Retina iPad Mini, probably the silver. Probably the Space Gray one as well, 32 gigabytes cellular model as well. And I'm going to use them for very different things. Peter, what are you going to get?
iPad Mini with Retina display is what I've got my eye on, so I'm keeping an eye out and wondering when exactly Apple is going to start shipping them.
Yeah, Apple has said later in November, which, I don't know if they would do it on, I mean, you're a retailer, Peter, would they do it on Black Friday?
That's entirely possible. It'd be a real smart move for them to drive traffic into the Apple store. It's not like people aren't going to be lining up anyway, but it would be an additional incentive. Craziness, I know.
Richard?
I'm really torn, because I do use my full-size iPad for general lighter work purposes. So I've got a keyboard case, it's pretty good, and I do quite a lot of trips to the coffee shop. Just take the iPad rather than the laptop. So I'm at a lot. I'm not 100% decided yet. I may get the big one, and then see what happens when the little one comes out, and take it from there.
Yeah, I've heard of some people who are planning to get the big one, and then, because some places have ridiculous return policies, if they like the Mini better, they will exchange it for a Mini. But if you're going to do that, make sure you check your local exchange policy, because the Mini may not be out yet by the time your Air return date slips. Peter, thank you so much, as always. If people are interested in finding out more about you, reading more of your writings, where can they go?
iMore, and on Twitter at Flarg, Flargh.
Richard?
iMore.com every day, and on Twitter at Ricka666.
And you can find me at Rene Ritchie on all of the social things. For a lot more iPad discussion, we've had a couple shows recently. We had Jim Dalrymple on with us last week. Peter and I did the entire event live. You can find all of that on imore.com/podcasts. The full history of the iMore show. I also had Brian Klug from Anantech and Ben Thompson from Stratechery on Vector. You can find that at imore.com/vector, and they talked about the components, the chipsets, all the technology in the iPad for Brian, and basically how you use your iPad, the experience of the iPad for Ben. Really interesting shows. I recommend them highly. That's imore.com/vector. And for all of our shows, you can go to mobilenations.com. Happy Halloween, everybody. Happy iPad Air launch day. We will be back next week. Thank you, chat room. Your costumes were amazing. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you.